Monday, April 10th, 2017. I'm the chair of the committee, acting chair Aaron Peskin, joined by committee member Katie Tang, and sitting in for Mark Farrell is Supervisor Jeff Sheehy. Our clerk is Ms. Elisa Samara, who has bronchitis, and I want to thank the folks at SFG Gov TV for live streaming this. Madam Clerk, could you or John read item number 1, please? Or are there any announcements?
Yes, the announcements first. Please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the April 18th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
And why don't we get a housekeeping motion to excuse Supervisor Farrell? Motion made by Supervisor Tang, and we will take that without objection. And Madam Clerk, could you please try to read the first item?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to require additional affordable housing or payment of a fee for certain sites that obtained higher residential development potential as a result of the rezoning of the Divisadero Street Neighborhood Commercial Transit District and the Fillmore Street Neighborhood Commercial Transit District in 2015, and making appropriate findings.
Thank you. I have been informed by President Breed that she would like this matter continued, and representing her office is Mr. Michael Howerton. Mr. Howerton, any words?
No, but good afternoon, Supervisors. We would like to request that this item be continued until May 1st, if possible.
Okay. He would like a continuance to the first day of May of 2017, a couple, 3 weeks from today. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to item number 1, which is to be continued momentarily? Please come on up if you have any comments. And we'll give each speaker 2 minutes, Madam Clerk. Whoa. First speaker, please.
Supervisors, my name is Dennis Moscofi, and I'm a nearly lifelong resident of D5 and a native San Franciscan. And I find that the current legislation, I support the continuance because I find the current legislation unacceptable. We need a great deal more affordable housing, and this measure appears to primarily support more market rate housing at a tiny offering for low-income working people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moscofi. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Jennifer Fieber with the San Francisco Tenants Union. So we learned last week that the area median income in the Western Addition is around 54%. So this proposal that Supervisor Breed for this building doesn't even reflect the reality of the situation on the ground. As Quentin Mecke pointed out, we shouldn't be doing policy based on anecdotes about our friends, but with real data. And the San Francisco Tenants Union did a survey of people who've been evicted, and 69% of them earn under $50,000 a year. So there's definitely a need still for this low-income housing, and we support this continuance because we oppose this development until the low-income housing is as high as it could possibly go. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fieber. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Gus Hernandez, Chair of the Steering Committee for Affordable Diviz. We just found out that this hearing item was continued. As you can see, we brought a lot of folks in the neighborhood who were here to speak to help improve the legislation that Supervisor Breed has put forward. And instead, we get a last-minute continuance. We took time off of work, time off of school, and it just shows actually her approach to this, excluding the community. So we are asking, so we support the continuance. We believe the additional time will allow for more needed improvements to this legislation. We request that during this time period of the continuance, between now and when the matter is heard again, that Supervisor Breed and the Planning Department engage with the community and hold a public forum for these issues to be discussed. Why hasn't she met with us? We want more affordable housing, not less. The proposal that she put forward and that we spoke at the last hearing just is not enough. We hope to be here in May to support the legislation that complies with the demands of our community and offers truly affordable housing not for high-income people, not for people making over the median income, for people who actually need affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. And you are all welcome to testify. 2 members of this panel will be here on May the 1st, and Supervisor Breed's staff is here, so you're absolutely welcome to comment. And I do believe, Mr. Hernandez, that Supervisor Breed does intend to meet with the community in the days and weeks ahead, hopefully to come up with a collaborative compromise. Next speaker, please.
My name is Dejanani. My name is Dejanani, and I work with the Eviction Defense Collaborative. And I'm here also in hope that we'll be back in May to support the legislation that complies with the demands of our community and offers truly affordable housing.
Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, thank you for having this hearing. My name is Don Eichelberger. I've lived in north of Panhandle area for over 15 years. I work at, I'm retired, but I do volunteer work still at Abalone Alliance Safe Energy Clearinghouse here in San Francisco, and I'm a dying breed. I'm one of the people that was able to do full-time or at least half-time organizing while working part-time in retail, addressing energy issues, including the municipalization of San Francisco Power, including stopping the home porting of USS Missouri, including stopping radioactive waste dumps from going down in Southern California, and many other campaigns, preventing native relocations in Southwest, etc. I fear that the way rents are going now, I'm able to do it partly because of rent control, but if I ever lost that rent control place, San Francisco would be history to me, and I think it's been made history to a lot of activists already. So I strongly support the move to continue this legislation, to give it better consideration, to give much more public input than it's been allowed up to now. And I thank you all for your deliberation on this and try to make me not an endangered species in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Jen, a member of Neighbors United, a District 5 progressive club. And I support the continuance, and I really hope that this long line of people shows to you how much the community absolutely is no longer going to stand for folks trying to roll out unaffordable housing legislation onto their communities anymore. It's been really frustrating, and I'm really happy to hear that Supervisor Breed is willing to speak to the community, because we've been asking for a really long time, and that just hasn't been an option. So I'm really happy that we're going to get the chance to talk to her about what we need in the community, and thank you so much for the continuance.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, Chair Peskin and Supervisors. My name is Jed Holtzman. I am a District 5 resident. I moved to San Francisco in 1999. I'm a local climate policy advocate. As someone who's lived here over a time period that the city has changed so drastically, the idea that we are talking about anything less than the citywide requirement of affordable housing for my neighborhood is completely insane. The situation has only gotten way, way worse since that citywide requirement was instituted, and pulling back instead of moving forward from that baseline would be as insane as cutting back on climate action right now at a time when things are a new level of bad. If we think that our action at the federal level is counterproductive and insane, then I would argue that the exact same thing is true of housing policy in San Francisco at this point. We need more affordable housing than we have by such an order of magnitude that whatever policies you could institute here would probably not still be enough, so we need to be as aggressive as we possibly can. And we will be here calling for more affordable housing until and unless the laissez-faire policies of the city and county of San Francisco result in all of us being forced out of the city, which is really one unhappy roommate away for many of us. That's not a sustainable way to run a town. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name's Richard Ivanhoe. I'm a resident of District 5. And even though I took the day off of work to be here, I do support the continuance. I reviewed the packet for this item, and it seemed that the Planning Department and Commission supported it being aligned with Prop C, June 2016 Prop C, which provided 15% for low and very low income. And they also referenced the Nexus study in November 2016, and that showed the impact of 100 units would be 37.6 condos or 31.8 apartments for AMI up to 120%. And I believe the legislation should be amended to provide more affordable housing for low and very low income households. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ivanhoe. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Lori Liederman. I live in the Inner Sunset. I'm a member of Neighbors United and D5 Action. I support this continuance. I would like it to be continued even longer until after the Prop C inclusionary ratios are settled. The conversion of these two districts to NCTs conferred a substantial density bonus to developers for 9 blocks of Fillmore and 12 blocks of Divisadero. The affordable inclusionary requirement must be greater than city policy under Prop C. It must be over and above the final Prop C ratios. It must not be a divide and conquer strategy that pits low-income households against middle-income households and adversely impacts the low-income households. It needs to be put on hold, pending finalization of the citywide inclusionary ratios, and then it must add to that at each of the levels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Zietlow, and I have lived in District 5 or in the Nopna area for almost 30 years. As a retired person, of course, I'm concerned about affordable housing since I do rent. But I'm more concerned for other people, families, and people trying to make a go at living here in the city. People that have been here for a long time that are uprooted constantly. And I do support the continuance, and I do want to see more affordable housing worked out so the low and very low income people can find housing. It makes for a much better city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Tony Robles. I'm with Senior and Disability Action. Just want to come out in support of the continuance. I know that there are ongoing discussions and discourse about the citywide requirement. The community wants to accept a proposal for Division Fillmore that is in addition to the citywide requirement. We want more affordable housing, not less, and for the people who need it. That is households making under the area median income, namely households and individuals that Senior Disability Action advocates for. And, the pitting against, pitting of one group against another is just, it's divisive, and, it's not healthy for the situation that we're in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robles. Next speaker, please.
My name is Javier Vigil. I am from high school at Leadership. I am a student representing my fellow student mates and friends. I am here to show support for the continuance, as it gives Supervisor Breed the opportunity to get connected and talk to her constituents. As a student and a member of various communities, I would motivate London Breed to reach out to millennials and to sit down with the most affected communities in San Francisco who are unable to get affordable housing, because, to be honest, no matter how much anyone says there is, it's still not enough. And to create together with said communities a bill that her community feels that represents their needs. Supervisors are meant to supervise and represent the constituents that elected them. And London Breed was elected on the basis of doubling affordable housing, not cutting it in half. So I urge London Breed to reach out to the district that she represents and create a bill that her constituents elected her on the basis of doubling affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Spencer. I'm a writer, artist, and entrepreneur, taking time off of work to be here today to strongly support this continuance in light of the outrageous nature of the proposed legislation. I think our hearts should be with the most vulnerable members of society at all times. That's clearly people who need housing, and it's in scarce supply in San Francisco that it's outrageous to me that we should be supporting the wealthiest members of the city and kicking the most vulnerable people to the curb. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Spencer. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Connor Ryan. I'm a resident of San Francisco for 41 years, and I've lived in the North Panhandle for the last 13. And I want to support continuance of this legislation because as it stands, it's very flawed. If we're going to retain anything like a vibrant and economically diverse San Francisco, we must strengthen affordable housing for all. But if we're going to renegotiate and start changing the rules of the game, we shouldn't be negotiating on the back of the most vulnerable and the low-income people of this city. So I support the continuance, and I support further study on this very flawed legislation. And I thank you for that, for the time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is David Wu. I was born and raised in District 5, and I still live in the district. I'm here coming out to support this continuance and that we need to redo the legislation as it currently exists. It seeks to cut affordable housing when we need to be fighting to expand it to the highest levels that are possible. I'm glad to hear that Supervisor Breed is intending to meet with the community on this legislation, as she has been largely absent and has not engaged her own constituents. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Supervisor Breed and the Planning Department in a public forum format. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Rufus Watkins. I'm speaking here individually for Midtown Park Apartments. I'm a resident. I was here, was 1970. I came into the district. I was raised there, and also I'm part of Save Midtown. I'm support of the continuancy, but also too, this legislation is flawed and need to go back to the drawing board. And plus, overall, the city of San Francisco needs to stop, especially the board of supervisors. I hear this every day of the rich and the powerful getting their way, and not the low-income people in the city of San Francisco. And again, thank you for the opportunity to have a good week. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins.
Supervisors, thank you. My name is Mark D'Antona. I'm a 19-year resident of District 8, Mr. Sheehy, so good to meet you. I come here to talk to you because I'm a hiring manager for a nonprofit that was founded here in San Francisco about 10 years ago, and I'm trying to hire entry-level workers. And those people need a place to live. And unfortunately, it's not very viable for them. So like my friend Mr. Holtzman said earlier, any legislation that we can do together is probably not even going to be enough to what we need. So we need to turn it up to 11. And so we really need your help on doing that, because we want to grow the economy in San Francisco, and that's through entry-level workers working their way up. I came here in 1997 and started at the very bottom at a tech startup. And now, I'm a hiring manager there, senior manager. And I'm contributing to this economy, and we need more people like that. We need to create those opportunities. It can't just be those high-wage earners. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So thank you all.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. My name's Peter Nassetier, and I'm a decade-long resident of District 5. And I support the continuance because I believe that the Supervisor Breed needs to take this time to reflect and meet with the community about this flawed legislation. Myself, I am a middle-class, middle-aged man who works in middle management, and I am scared because I see my community changing around me, and it's not just working-class people, but it's paper pushers too. And Divisadero is the Divisadero corridor is quite diverse with a lot of minority-owned businesses, and I see that endangered. And I think it's a critical time for this board to take a look at the reality that many of us San Franciscans have been living in for the last decade. I mean, this city's always been expensive, but it's gone from regular expensive to cartoon villainy expensive. And I fear what's going to happen to not just middle-aged, middle-class, middle management voters like me, but children and seniors. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you for giving us this time to speak. My name is Trevor Martin. I live in the Excelsior, District 11. I've lived there for 2 years now, but before that, I lived over a decade right over here on Turk and Leavenworth in an SRO. I am a recent graduate from the USF, and I've recently got married, and I would like to make San Francisco my home. I and my colleagues are here to demand higher affordable housing requirements other than the proposal that Supervisor Breed has put forward. We demand that these requirements are affordable to the people who live here, families, and the people who want to live here, not affordable to developers. We support this continuance, and we urge that supervisors in London Breed in particular take this time, along with the Planning Commission, to reach out to the neighbors and communities to see what the needs of the people actually are. Any requirement, we demand that it is in addition to the citywide requirement, not a proposal that takes away from the lower income constituents and citizens of the city and gives it away to higher wage earners. We want affordable housing, more affordable housing, not less. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Brovman. I am a parent in the Fillmore. I support this continuance, and I hope that Supervisor Breed will, in fact, meet with her community during this period to uphold her promise to us that she will create, in fact, the highest level of affordable housing in the city, not the insultingly low level that is currently in this legislation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Renee Curran. I've been a resident of the Inner Sunset in District 5 for 20 years. I also support the continuance and hope that the Land Use Committee, along with Supervisor Breed, will work hard on creating a legislation that really works for San Francisco. We don't have a housing crisis here. We have a crisis of affordability of housing. We're not going to solve world hunger by opening up a bunch of Michelin star restaurants, and we're not going to solve the housing affordability crisis with a bunch of luxury housing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Lorraine Petty. I'm a senior. I live in the Fillmore now. For years, I lived right across the street from the proposal at 650 Divisadero. I support the continuance very much. I think we need to have that larger discussion about the inclusionary percentages. I think the corridors program should match the inclusionary percentages and, in fact, be a little higher because more density is offered to the developers. In addition, I sent the supervisors an email over the weekend proposing a solution regarding the confusion over the AMIs, the discussion of neighborhood AMIs. I think there is a way out. I think there's a way to have our cake and eat it too, and I hope that you read that and give it some consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Lisa Aubrey, and I'm a resident of the Panhandle and have been for nearly 3 decades. While I'm a little frustrated by today's continuance because I took time off from work, I will say that I do support the continuance if it means that we can try to improve Supervisor Breed's legislation. And I just, I think there is a solution here, and we need your help as members of the Land Use Committee and as supervisors, and we need our very own supervisors' help because there is truly a crisis of affordability for people making $100,000 or $50,000 a year. There's just not enough housing, and you've heard people say that over and over. But what if we really actually all came together and came up with a plan and compromised? That would really be something, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have to sit through lines and lines of people commenting and worrying and fretting. And so thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Please move to continue the legislation, and we hope that we can meet with our supervisor. She ran on the promise of affordable housing, and many elected her believing that, and that remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Deirdre Booker, and I live in the Nopna neighborhood. I've been here for 30 years. I support the continuance for more dialogue and hopefully a good compromise where it's a win-win situation for both sides. I like the idea of affordable housing, especially for people who work in San Francisco, like our police people, our fire people, and especially our educators. They need a place to live and work in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Tess Wellborn from D5 Action and Panhandle resident. I support the continuance, and I support the idea of having some more discussion with Supervisor Breed and the community, probably involving planning so we can avoid that spot zoning that people brought up last Monday. I'd also like to point out that the last time that we requested a community meeting with our supervisor about this project and other projects, somehow we didn't get the notice about the meetings. And so I'm respectfully asking her chief of staff to make sure that to include at least all of the people who are here today in noticing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Looking back at our traditional RHNA numbers, we know that the middle class has been excluded from the city's affordable housing programs for the last 30 or 40 years, and we appreciate Supervisor Breed's attempt to try to create housing for the firefighters, families, teachers, EMTs, and working folks that make this city work. We do, however, fear that the uncertainty in the creation of housing by moving the goalposts will actually result in less total subsidized affordable housing, which is ultimately the goal of everybody in this chamber. We do support the continuance and hope that we have a final result that has everybody coming out with a thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Dean Preston, good afternoon, supervisors. And first off, let's put to rest the idea that this kind of legislation, by proposing to house people who earn 140% of median income, is somehow going to house teachers, as the last speaker said. There's a reason that the teachers union doesn't buy that kind of argument, and nor should you. This continuance, I support it. It will give London Breed and the city an opportunity to turn over a new leaf when it comes to development. And turning over a new leaf means actually advocating for the community as opposed to advocating for the interests of developers, which is what we have seen for the last 2 years from Supervisor Breed on this issue since the original giveaway that this legislation seeks to address. What that means during the time before the next hearing, I hope, is actual communications. I feel for the folks who took time off from work, from school to be here. they knew they were going to introduce this continuance, send an email to Gus Hernandez, the head of Affordable Diviz. That's just basic respect so that we can get the word out and engage in a respectful dialogue. I want to echo the sentiment that was raised earlier. We need a public meeting to get community input on this. Let's work together to actually ensure that we have more affordable housing on Divisadero and Fillmore, not less. Thank you very much.
Seeing no other members of the public for public comment, we will close public comment. And thank you all for your testimony, and I hope that by May the 1st, we've all figured something out. If not, we will have hard work to do here on that date. And is there a motion to continue this item to May the 1st?
So moved.
Made by Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Sheehy, can we take that without objection? The item will be heard again on May the 1st. Madam Clerk, could you please read item number 2?
Agenda item number 2 is an ordinance amending the Green Building Code to establish requirements for the installation of electric vehicle charger infrastructure in new buildings or those undergoing major alterations and making appropriate findings.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience to all of the staff here who worked really hard on this EV readiness ordinance. So very excited today to talk about how we in San Francisco here are trying to really lead the charge and push the envelope when it comes to electric vehicle adoption. What we're seeing is that demand is only growing, not only in San Francisco, but really in this Bay Area around electric vehicle use. And what we really need to do is to get our infrastructure ready so that when people do want to just make that decision to adopt an EV vehicle, that they actually have a place to charge them. So at the end of February, SF Environment, our mayor's office, and our office introduced legislation that would impact new construction and significant renovations in San Francisco, so that 10%, as we introduced it originally, 10% would be turnkey parking spaces that would be EV ready for new construction and, again, significant renovations. An additional 10% would also be flexible, and we would require that conduit to be installed from electrical panels to each parking space so that there would be the opportunity and the flexibility to upgrade if needed. And then the remaining spaces, again, this was originally as adopted, was to have them be EV capable. So that in the future, basically we are trying to let developers know ahead of time what it is that they can do to prepare when there is that demand that will be coming forth from residents in the building. So there will be a number of amendments today being made, many of which are technical in nature, and I'll let our SF Environment staff go over that. But really, this is just such an exciting effort that I think, coupled with our other piece of legislation around getting our city municipal vehicles to also be electric in the very short future, I think this is really important for all of us in San Francisco to set a great example for the region and the rest of the country. And lastly, before I turn it over to our Department of Environment Director, Debbie Rafael, I did want to thank everyone who's worked so hard on this issue. Of course, our director, Debbie Rafael. I see Tyrone Jew from our mayor's office, Barry Hooper, Jesse Denver, Guillermo Rodriguez, everyone who's just tried to figure out and have been working proactively so that San Francisco can be at the forefront of this issue. And hopefully one day people like me can actually go ahead and drive an electric vehicle here in San Francisco. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Rafael to go over some of the major amendments that we're going to be making. And then after that, we'll actually have to continue this item to the next following week's Land Use Committee hearing.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Thank you to the Land Use Committee for hearing us today. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to Mayor Lee and Supervisor Tang for their leadership and partnership, frankly, in working towards what I consider to be a bold move, but a move that reflects great stakeholder engagement, flexibility, and meaningfulness when it comes to the future of electric vehicles here in San Francisco. So what I'm going to do, a little tag team here with my colleague Barry Hooper, where I'm going to set the context for why this is important, why we need to do this now, and who has been at the table with us. And then I'm going to turn it over to Barry, who will talk about what the ordinance structure does and what the suggested amendments will do to make adjustments to that framework and that ordinance. So, as you know, San Francisco has very bold carbon dioxide reduction goals. In fact, we have pledged as a city, and the supervisors signed off on this, to reduce our CO2 emissions 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. That's a lot of words, a lot of numbers, but the point there is for us to get from where we are now to 80% below our 1990 levels, we're going to need to set up policies today that pave the way for that achievement in the future. So the way we talk about how we're going to get there is with this very simple climate action strategy, 0, 50, 100 routes. 0 is zero waste to landfill and incineration. 50% of trips in sustainable modes. That's our transit first philosophy. Get people out of their cars, make it safe to walk and bike on the streets, make sure that new developments make it easy for people to ride transit, parking minimums, all the different things we do in the city to get to 50 and even beyond. 100 is 100% renewable energy. That means getting our electricity onto 100% renewable. It also means looking at all the other sources of energy that we use. I'll come back to that in a minute. And roots is how we're going to heal the planet by tearing up concrete with our Sidewalk Ambassadors program, our neighbor that Supervisor Tang is so active on. It's also using our compost on rangeland to actually increase soil fertility and sequester carbon. So today is about one element of that path, and that has to do with looking at transportation fuels. So in that 100% renewable energy, we're going to have to get off of our fuels. We're going to have to switch them from natural gas, from diesel, from gasoline. The ordinance before you today is all about gasoline. How do we get off of gasoline vehicles? How do we electrify the transportation system? So California, why now? California, as Supervisor Tang said, leads the nation. We are a state that totally gets the need to buy electric vehicles, and the San Francisco Bay Area leads California. So we clearly have a very receptive audience here in California and here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our governor is very gung-ho on electric vehicles. He has set very ambitious goals for the state because he too understands that for us to meet our statewide climate goals, we're going to have to get off of gasoline and diesel. So his goal is that we're going to have 1.5 million electric vehicles on the road by 2025. So the state has set an ambitious goal. To get there, they're looking at various ways of doing it. What's interesting is they're going to be mandating that 22% of all new sales of vehicles in California by 2025, 22% of those are going to have to be electric. So the state is driving this. The state is setting goals. It's going to happen at the local level. What are we going to do here in San Francisco to be ready when those vehicles are there on the market? So the barriers, I think these are not news to anyone, certainly to Supervisor Tang, who's trying to figure out how to drive an electric vehicle herself. We need convenient charging. We've got to have the cost come down of electric vehicles. We need to have a better range of our electric vehicles, and we need a variety of choices of vehicles because not everybody wants a tiny sedan. Some people might want a station wagon. Somebody might want a light-duty truck. We need choice. So those are the barriers that we're dealing with. This is my favorite slide, and it's a little wonky, but I want to take a minute to show it to you because we've been hearing a lot from skeptics, I would say, or people who are concerned. How do you know the demand is there? If we build it, will they come? You're asking us to invest in our buildings, but how do we know there's going to be a demand for those electric vehicles? Well, this was a slide that I saw in a presentation in Oslo, Norway, that talked about the Norwegian experience in terms of uptake of electric vehicles. And what you see is for many years it was fairly flat until about 2010 when the curve uptook dramatically. So what happened between 1990 and 2010 were all the things that we're doing in California right now. But if you stop there, you might say, well, did they work? All those policies we put in place, infrastructure, incentives, HOV lanes, maybe that's not enough. But what happened in Norway was something that's about to happen here next year. And that is the car companies kicked in. They started to give the customers a wide variety of electric vehicles. So luck favors a prepared mind. We have been preparing ourselves here in California. This legislation will go the step further to make sure that the buildings that are built in the future are EV ready, and so that when those car companies come, which they will, which we know they are, we're going to be ready to take advantage of it and be able to meet those bold goals that we have as a city and as a state. And frankly, we're not alone. This is not something that just crazy San Francisco is coming up with. We have cities all across the Bay Area that are doing their part to look at mandates for new construction. They do it a little differently because their housing stock, their building stock is different, but we're all sharing information and we're working together to come up with the best solutions to meet these needs. So, we've been working at this for about a year and a half. It's been rather a long haul. We've been working with a number of partners, and this slide is just to show you at a visual the variety of people who've come to the table to help us. We've been working with affordable housing builders, residential builders, large-scale developers, electricians, construction contractors, and the IBEW. They've all been at the table to help us. And I want to send my own gratitude, and that's to the Department of Building Inspection. This ordinance will be implemented in their shop. They're the ones who are going to have to be able to understand it and make it work and make it feasible. And we've worked very closely with Tom Huey, with Ron Allen, and with James Zahn. All of them have come to the table with us to bring to you a piece of policy that is meaningful, that is measured, that is cost-effective, and that will set us up for the future that we want. And finally, I just want to say that 2 commissions have also voted on this, the Building Inspection Commission and the Commission on the Environment. Both support it unanimously. You have those resolutions in your packets, and we're very proud of their support, and I think it's an indication of how much effort has gone into this piece of legislation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Barry Hooper, who will go through how this works and what the amendments mean today. And then we are happy to answer questions.
And Ms. Raphael, before you do that, relative to that wide range of stakeholders and affected parties that you consulted with, did that include the San Francisco Apartment Association?
They were absolutely, they were part of our outreach. They expressed concern very recently, and we have our intention is to work very closely to answer the concerns. We believe that their concerns will be addressed very easily in this ordinance, and Barry can speak to more about the specifics of their concerns if they would like.
So you will be recommending to the sponsor of this legislation some additional amendments? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not convinced that, I think that when we sit down with them in more detail, we can work through some of their concerns and see if amendments are needed. I'm not sure at this point that we will need to change the ordinance to address their concerns.
Okay, I look forward to hearing more.
Great.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Should I proceed?
Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. The ordinance as proposed, as Supervisor Tang outlined, was focused on flexibility and being both pragmatic about some upfront costs at new construction as well as planning for the future. So the core of that is a requirement that electrical service be sized.
Sir, could you identify yourself for the record? I'm sorry. You might have
Pardon
said...
me. I apologize. My name is Barry Hooper with the Department of the Environment. So the core of the ordinance is that electrical service would need to be sized sufficiently to be able to provide for simultaneous charging using the industry standard level 2 charger at 20% of parking spaces. And with that level of service, you'd be able to expand parking voluntarily using charging management systems in the future to anything up to and including all parking spaces in the facility. Then within the building's electrical distribution system, the ordinance would require 10% of spaces be turnkey. So it's as easy as possible to install a charger, and that's defined as a full circuit, a 40 amp, 208 volt circuit from the relevant electrical panel board to the individual parking space. The ordinance proposed that for an additional 10% of spaces, either the same, more full circuits, or an empty conduit, and the intent of that was to provide some flexibility to upsize those circuits if desired. And then, again, provision for remaining spaces to be capable of having charging extended to them. You have a summary outlining in a little bit more detail than this slide. The suggested, the recommended amendments to the ordinance, but they're summarized in this slide, which is they consist of striking.
Mr. Cooper, at the risk of
Yes, sir.
wasting more paper, do you have a copy of these PowerPoint slides? Because these screens, which are ancient, are completely we can't see them.
I do not have a copy of the PowerPoint, but I do have
But I'm just like this slide, or the slide that Debbie was showing from Norway is like, I'm sure everybody in the audience and who's watching this on TV can see it, but the three of us who have to make the decision actually can't. I salute you for saving paper, but this is probably not the most
I do
optimal.
have a laptop. I could loan that to the members.
You don't want to give me your laptop. You might not ever
sorry,
get
I
it
don't have a
back.
printed copy with me. Is there a means?
Well, it doesn't matter. We're going to continue this item anyway, so we can visit this again, but you are hereby warned that none of us can use our screens worth a darn.
All right. Thank you. I apologize for that. So the biggest substantive change that's suggested is striking the flexibility requirement for the second 10% of spaces. So that would just eliminate the requirement to have any conduit or full circuits extended to those spaces. And then for all remaining spaces, rather than requiring a fully detailed electrical design for future wiring to each parking space, the ordinance would merely require pragmatically installing sleeves or conduit, so you could extend wiring as needed, and you provide space to add additional electrical panels as would be needed in order to serve up to 100% of parking spaces with EV chargers and charging management system. The other change that's suggested the ordinance, category of changes that suggested the ordinance, is adding a provision to the Environment Code, which would require the owner or the homeowners association in these buildings to annually notify tenants of the availability of electric vehicle charging infrastructure so that they would have the opportunity to come to terms on installing an EV charger if they desired. A key consideration, and really a front and center one for all stakeholders, has been cost. We partnered with the cities of Oakland and Fremont in the technical work to develop this proposal, and have a consultant that shared between the three cities produced individual cost effectiveness reports for each city, looking primarily at the very sensitive category of smaller new development, particularly affordable housing, and the range of additional parking space, the range of parking spaces that such facilities would commonly have. And so two scenarios were looked at in great detail, one where you'd have 10 parking spaces and another one with 60. If you were to require that 20% of spaces were quote-unquote turnkey, then for 10 spaces, that would be 2 turnkey spaces. That'd be about an $1,800 incremental cost, or an average of $184 per parking space. If you scale it up to a 60 parking space new facility, that'd be 12 turnkey spaces. Again, this is now conservative because that would be dialed back to 6 under the revised proposal. That would be incremental cost of about $10,000, or an average increased per parking space of about $175. Now, what was a number of stakeholders were careful to point out was that in newer and larger buildings, which have a greater amount of parking, which is atypical of infill or affordable housing, but we definitely see them here in town, you tend to have considerably more opportunity for more complex electrical infrastructure, but particularly transformers on the customer side of the electrical meter. The run of conduit extends from the electrical service to the individual parking space as the size of the building increases. And of course, it's going to be professional union labor to build those larger properties, and there is an impact there, a consideration. So the overall cost is larger for those facilities, and we acknowledge that. There are a number of provisions of the ordinance to control costs and that do directly address the concerns that were raised by a number of stakeholders, including the Apartment Association. And they really fall into two categories. One is for new construction, where the design of the building and the provision of electrical infrastructure in the building are you will provide electrical infrastructure if you're going to build a new building, but one element that's can be unpredictable in its cost is the cost of upgrading the portion of the grid that's specific to your service is something the developer always can't bear the cost of if the utility has to make upgrades to serve them. And that cost is highly variable. It's not necessarily related to use. It's not necessarily related to project size. And so consistent with the state green building code, this ordinance would maintain a cap on that cost of $400 per parking space. So that's the same level it's in the state's existing electric vehicle readiness requirements. Additionally, and much more sensitively for existing buildings, particularly residential buildings, be maintaining that same cost cap if a upgrade of utility service was necessary. Second, the ordinance for existing buildings is only applicable to a major alteration, and that term has a specific definition that's been in place since 2008 in the San Francisco Green Building Code of projects that are 25,000 square feet in area that include significant structural work, and that phrase significant structural work is defined in separate requirements administered by the Department of Building Inspection, but it's a consistently applied phrase.
So have you, I don't know if you saw J.K. Deneen's piece in the Chronicle relative to our seismic safety program for soft story buildings and the apparent rate of compliance as it relates to Tier 3 projects under that, but I assume some of those projects might trigger this, and have you done any thinking about whether or not this is going to further increase costs for seismic retrofit, and whether we have two good public purposes that are running into one another, and if so, what your thoughts are?
That's a fantastic question, and the third criteria in that definition is an important addition, which is that in addition to the significant structural work and the scale of the project, there needs to also be significant alteration to mechanical, electrical, or plumbing systems. And so it would be common in a standalone seismic retrofit project to pull the permit specifically for the seismic retrofit, and so it would not necessarily entail that upgrades to the other building systems.
Well, there's another laudable public goal that this board has, I think, unanimously supported, which is, and we're seeing it mostly in seismic retrofits, which is the inclusion of accessory dwelling units or units, which actually would entail pulling plumbing and electrical. So I think we should have some very, I think, careful thought about these laudable goals. I mean, if this only applied to new construction, I wouldn't be asking these questions, but you got to be a little careful, particularly insofar as in 2015, the city mandated, what is turning out to, I mean, if you read the article, the reason we have half, or appears as September is rolling around, 50% non-compliance isn't because folks haven't gotten the letters and don't want to do something about it, but is because of prohibitive costs. And so I want to be, and at the same time, we are actually incentivizing building of additional, by design, affordable housing in these projects. And so we should think about that, and we should talk to the people who are doing that. And I'm not exactly sure, no offense, Ms. Raphael, whether or not the people who are most affected by this think they were as consulted as you represented, or at least that is kind of the sense I've gotten over the last 96 hours. Proceed.
Oh, thank you, sir. So in addition, let's say that threshold has been crossed and cost is a consideration, then there also are three additional outs with regard to the ordinance. One is this ordinance alone cannot trigger an upgrade to electrical service. So which would be an important consideration in that discussion where you're adding an accessory dwelling unit to a seismic retrofit project, wherein it would be atypical for that scale of project to also include changing the actual physical infrastructure that connects the building to the grid. And so what this ordinance then, in those cases where if the amount of charging that's required for new construction would require an upgrade to electrical service, but electrical service is not within the project scope, the project is allowed to scale back the preparedness for EV charging up to the level that the existing service can accommodate, even if that means no charging. Second, there's a provision where a residential project may petition to the director of the building inspection on the basis of the compliance with these requirements would constitute a hardship, and the director has the option to either waive the requirement or to come to terms on an alternative compliance pathway. And then third, this is not exclusively for residential. So for residential and non-residential, where there's a finding of technical infeasibility because the state has requirements for accessibility when you begin to provide for electric vehicle charging, and of course existing buildings have generally not been built with future accessibility requirements in mind. So when it's not possible to meet current accessibility requirements, again, you'd also have exemption for those areas of the building, including all parking if necessary, to not cause an undue hardship.
And what's it cost me to prove that to you?
There would certainly be a professional cost to that, and similar that there would need to be for the structural design as well. And that concludes my presentation. There's a more detailed summary of the suggested amendments in your packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Supervisor Peskin, if I may, to your point, we reached out to the apartment association as we did to all stakeholders. Their engagement became much more focused at the end of last week. We would be happy between now and next week to sit down and discuss in all the detail that's necessary to see if amendments are needed. When we took a look at their ask, it didn't look like there were amendments needed, but if there are, we would bring them to you.
I don't want to put words in their mouth, and I can see that they have plenty of representation in this room, so I'll let them speak for themselves. But I am under the impression that they were under the impression that this only applied to new construction and not existing construction, and did not realize that until it popped up on the internet on Thursday evening.
I don't know. I cannot say where that implication came from, and I can also say that we are more than happy to sit down and go through step by step every concern and see if in fact the ordinance is unnecessarily problematic.
And I'm saying this actually not only on behalf of the apartment association, but I'm also saying it on behalf of tenants, because to the extent that the city is telling these folks, hey, mandatory retrofit, and then we're adding things, those costs, capital costs, can be passed through and raise rents. So this is a complicated formula that has my attention much more than 2050.
Noted.
Thank you. Can I? Okay, through the chair. So, certainly I did see the correspondence come in regarding the apartment association and legitimate concerns that Supervisor Peskin spoke to. And, we always had the significant renovation in here, and I just wanted to reiterate that, on page 4, where it talks about the definition for major alterations, SF Environment has clarified that the ordinance is only applicable to major renovations where green building requirements have applied since 2008, as Mr. Hooper mentioned. That already requires LEED Silver or better in those buildings. So, and then I think you heard about the various exceptions that would be made, even to the extent where you actually would not be providing EV charging in certain circumstances. So, if the electrical capacity was not there. So I will be happy to follow up with SF Environment and some other stakeholders on any of the issues that they brought to us. But perhaps at this time, I don't know if there's any other questions, and maybe we can go to public comment and hear from the audience members on any other issues that they might have.
Sure, and I'm happy to, subject to public comment, adopt these amendments, continue it a week, but you all will work it out, hopefully. And with that, why don't we open up to public comment? First speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Brooke Turner with the Coalition for Better Housing. While we applaud the effort as environmentally concerned partners in San Francisco, we do point to this as a failure of process. Never were we approached by anyone from either the supervisor's office, the mayor's office, by the commissions about this issue. We were under the impression, however, that it was only to be for new construction. We are very concerned about issues relating to people or to folks who are doing seismic retrofits on their buildings and how this would affect them. We would like very much for this to be continued, bifurcated, whatever it takes to be put aside for the time being so that we have that opportunity that we should have had to address this issue beforehand. Never during this process were we reached out from anyone on this. And I think, as I said, that's a failure of the process, and it shouldn't be allowed to go forward without our input, since the residential housing industry is a huge part of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Peskin and members of the committee. My name is Anthony Harrison, and I am the Director of Public Policy for ChargePoint. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to testify in support of this legislation that's been sponsored by the Mayor and Supervisor Tang. ChargePoint is the world's largest electric vehicle network. We have over 33,000 charging ports, including 640 ports here in the city of San Francisco. Every 3 seconds, a driver connects to a ChargePoint station. And because of that, ChargePoint drivers have driven over 545 million gas-free miles. We've been very active in the development of green building standards throughout California for electric vehicle infrastructure since the original statewide Cal Green mandatory plug-in electric vehicle, or PEV, readiness codes were adopted. This legislation builds upon statewide PEV readiness standards, and it supports the City of San Francisco's climate action strategy that was adopted in 2013. By expanding access to clean alternative transportation infrastructure, and by supporting the GHG emissions reduction targets of 40% below 1990 levels in 2025. We believe this legislation is well designed to address immediate and long-term PEV demand for several reasons. One, it includes the measures to accommodate near-term demand and to future-proof new developments and existing buildings undergoing major retrofits that can accommodate even larger number of electric vehicles in the long term. I agree with Director Raphael that we need to be making these investments now. Plain and simple, PEVs the demand is growing, it's showing. California is currently close to reaching 5% of all electric vehicle sales. Those numbers are significantly higher within the city of San Francisco as residents are adopting electric vehicles at a higher rate than we're seeing in the rest of the state. The U.S. PEV sales had their highest month on record in December of 2016, and 2017 is already way above pace and will probably exceed initial projections. PG&E has recently predicted that the number of
Sir, thank you. You can submit the rest of your comments, but we have to give everybody the same amount of time. I'm sorry.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Maureen Blanc, and I'm the director of a nonprofit called Charge Across Town. And our mission is really simple. It's to get Supervisor Katie Tang into an electric car, as well as all of you here and across California. We actually started as a project with the San Francisco Department of the Environment back in 2012, helping to promote electric vehicle infrastructure in commercial and residential buildings. We found we were a little too soon for the problem, the chicken and egg problem, which was there was not enough demand and there was inertia with the developers and landlords. So we refocused our efforts and focused on the consumer end. And our goal is to educate consumers about electric vehicles, about EV infrastructure and the technologies to continue to push forward with California's environmental laws. As you know, and as the city knows and our great mayor knows, San Francisco is the EV capital of America. We are the epicenter of EV adoption and awareness, and we outpace the rest of the country. However, charging is a huge hurdle to EV adoption. We hear that over and over again as we talk to consumers across the state. Here in San Francisco, over 30% of our folks list lack of charging stations and charging options as a hurdle to owning a vehicle. Again, we talk to homeowners and apartment dwellers. 90% of EV charging is done at home. If they can't plug in, they're not going to buy an electric car. So we're here today to support this ordinance overwhelmingly and to help continue to advance the adoption of EVs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Chair Peskin and Supervisors. Jed Holtzman, Senior Policy Analyst for 350 Bay Area. We support this legislation and would like to thank Ms. Raphael, Ms. Denver, Mr. Hooper, and Supervisor Tang for their work on this. We do a lot of work with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which Supervisor Sheehy now is a board member on. And they actually just are approving their their regional climate protection strategy, which includes a vision for 2050 along the 7 sectors of the economy that are called out by AB 32. Decarbonizing industry and electrifying transportation are absolutely critical planks of that climate protection strategy and moving the region towards where we need to be in 2050. Ultimately, the cost that we saw in this presentation, even for 20%, is so low compared to the cost of construction. Property values here are the highest in the country. Housing is a gratuitous source of profit. It's so gratuitous that it's in the newspaper in other cities. Property taxes are exceptionally low here. There's really no reason that we shouldn't have 20%. I actually oppose these amendments weakening this legislation. There's no reason that we need to weaken this legislation at all. Eventually, we will be 100% off of fossil fuels for transportation, period. Like, the region is moving there. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District is pushing us there, and CARB is pushing them there. So the idea that we're going to slow walk this in some way is baffling to me. We'll be 100% electric in almost all use cases. There may be some alternative fuels, but really we need to be putting this together right now. Supervisor Tang is a judicious and cautious legislator, and I trust that her requirements for full renovation are not too loose, too weak, or going to rope in too much additional construction. We need to get this done, and we encourage reaching out to the Air District, who will be...
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Gia Vason. I'm the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Project Manager for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GoBiz. And our unit exists to help accelerate deployment of zero emission vehicle infrastructure in our state. And I'm here to express our support for the EV Readiness Ordinance. Rapid uptake of zero emission vehicle technology is key to meeting Governor Brown's goal of 1.5 million ZEVs on the road by 2050. And that's coming fast. We have today on the road about 285,000 ZEVs, and we're not that far away from 2025. So, moreover, decarbonizing transportation is critical in achieving California's ambitious climate change and air quality targets. The EV Readiness Ordinance will greatly enhance access to charging stations and will also really increase access in multi-unit dwellings and workplace charging, which is really a must if we're going to achieve mass adoption. It also will likely result in lower costs than it will for retrofitting buildings in the future, which I think is very important, and it sounds like SF Environment has done a lot of work to demonstrate that. And finally, California is a leader in zero-emission vehicle technology and in its commitment to the environment, and often San Francisco is on the cutting edge of pushing us and pushing our state toward a more sustainable future. So we applaud what the city is doing, and we encourage adoption of this important ordinance. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Chair Peskin, Joel Koppel, Thursday, part-time planning commissioner. My day job is with the San Francisco electrical construction industry. I take care of sustainable energy solutions, so this is something we're really excited to see. I wanted to just talk a little bit about the construction portion of why this is such a no-brainer. When the opportunity arises where there's foundations being poured or concrete slabs, it is considerably more cost-effective to install pathways, conduits for the future than it is to do it after the fact. This completely makes sense. Our entire industry is thrilled to be involved in the discussion and very happy to be here in full support of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon again. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Excited to be here supporting the ordinance here today. The EV ordinance was going to ensure that San Francisco adequately prepares for the environmental challenges that we all know lie ahead. One of our organization's chief goals is to reduce our individual carbon footprint. That means concentrating new housing near transit and jobs, but also designing housing that enables tenants and buyers to make environmentally friendly decisions. The data consistently shows that the electrical vehicle market is growing and that new housing needs to be prepared to accommodate that need. We'd also like to acknowledge the hard work from SF Environment. It's been a pleasure working with them for these last few months since they originally reached out to us last November because they wanted to make sure that they were engaging the housing community. Since then, we've spent time making sure that both market rate and affordable housing developers were involved in this legislation. And whenever our members had questions, we were always able to connect them with SF Environment, who was always very responsive and willing to meet in person. Whenever a city department puts forward a new proposal that's going to impact how housing is being built in San Francisco, we look forward to working with them, engaging early and often when necessary. We believe this type of collaboration absolutely ensures the best policies move forward. We'd like to thank Supervisor Tang and Mayor Lee for their leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Eddie On, Executive Director of Brightline Defense, a public policy nonprofit that's worked a lot on environmental justice issues in Bayview Hunters Point. And over the last year and a half, we've worked specifically in connecting Bayview to state policymaking institutions like the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, as we move the state of California forward to connect more to so-called disadvantaged communities, which has been a term of art developed to target resources to make sure that communities can get access to things like solar, energy efficiency, and EV charging stations. We're in support of the EV readiness ordinance. We believe this is an important policy in order to make electric vehicles more affordable and more accessible to disadvantaged communities. Thanks to longtime environmental advocates, we've seen that incentives for purchasing or leasing electric vehicles has actually increased from the California Air Resources Board. For instance, with households of incomes over 300%, or excuse me, less than 300% or equal to the federal poverty level, we see that incentives such as $4,500 for battery electric vehicles, $7,000 for fuel cell vehicles. But the key barrier still remains that infrastructure is a huge obstacle for low-income residents of San Francisco, say, to obtain an electric vehicle. So that's why we believe that as California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission continues to shift the state toward EVs, we'd love to see this happen at the local level and then be modeled up statewide. So we'd like to thank Supervisor Katie Tang, the Mayor's Office, as well as the SF Department of Environment for introducing this important legislation to create cleaner environments, cleaner jobs, and cleaner communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Supervisors. My name is Stacy Rhinexis. I'm founder and CEO of Power Tree Services. We are a San Francisco-based company focused exclusively on installing electric vehicle charging and coupled with solar and energy storage into apartment buildings. We are currently in the process of construction in dozens of buildings in San Francisco. And I wanted to express our support for this ordinance and make a couple of quick comments to help. One is, according to the Northern California Auto Dealers Association, last month, 8.2% of all new vehicles registered in San Francisco were plug-ins of one flavor or another. That's a pretty tremendous number when you think about that relative to the population. I would also highlight a study that we've performed with previous legislation at the state level that showed that for every vehicle that becomes electric, you're generating about $10,000 a year in new economic activity by eliminating gasoline, the 80 cents on every dollar that we spend on gasoline, and keeping it instead as local activity in the community. If you translate that, that means roughly $300 to $350 per year per vehicle in new sales tax to the city and county of San Francisco. So encouraging electric vehicles is both sound fiscally as well as ecologically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisors, thank you. My name is Sach Constantine. I'm the Director of Policy at the Center for Sustainable Energy. We're a nonprofit whose mission is to accelerate the transition to a clean, renewable energy future, powered exclusively by renewable energy, I should say. We also happen to run the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, that is the state's incentive program for electric vehicles, and we will be running the state's incentive program for infrastructure, that is charging equipment across the state. We'll be administering the $200 million in block grants for the state to support EV infrastructure. I know never to go after Stacy and try to one-up him on numbers. I also know that many of the things that I would tell you really corroborate and repeat the things that my colleagues have already said from Charge Across Town, from SF Environment. I can tell you that in the position we're in, with the data we have on all electric vehicle users across the state and our responsibility to promote additional vehicle use, that it is absolutely true, the logic is flawless. We need to get more vehicle charging infrastructure out there. We need to make that charging infrastructure affordable and accessible. So we are here to speak in strong support of this bill. The logic, as I said, is very elegant. We also appreciate, however, the amendments and the concern being taken to avoid additional costs to low-income multi-unit dwellers, to the building sector, the residential sector in general. And I would say that from our point of view and from our experience, the amendments being proposed and many of the solutions that are available and in front of SF Environment can provide those kinds of solutions. So overall, we commend this effort and look forward to leadership from the city, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. And if there are any other members of the public to testify on this item, if you'd line up to your right, my left.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Charlie Goss. I work on government affairs for the Apartment Association. And I want to start off by saying, I think that this ordinance makes perfect sense for new construction, but to affect and impact existing buildings in this ordinance doesn't seem to make sense. The issues are so different, and we would appreciate some effort to bifurcate the ordinance and perhaps reconsider how it affects existing buildings. I think the Department of Environment does great work, and we support them on many levels, but unfortunately, it's just not a true statement that the managers and owners of existing housing were consulted at all, even to this day, and still haven't been on this ordinance. The outreach, quite simply, just was not there. I watch our hearings, or your hearings, every Tuesday. I saw this was introduced as it applies to new construction, is what it was billed as. The ordinance becomes public when the agenda was listed on Thursday afternoon, and we found out it applies to existing buildings. We have a number of concerns. I had a concern about the definition of the alterations and the extent of the alterations that did get answered, so thank you for that. But the bottom line, and the reason why existing buildings are so different, it's just a different animal, is the wiring is not there, the infrastructure is not there, the sub-metering is not there. And it seems like it hasn't been considered. The vast majority of our buildings were built before 1970. Many of them, the building I live in, was built in 1911. It just doesn't have the infrastructure to maintain this. The other thing, too, is it's not sub-metered, so you have any number of residents paying for the one tenant who has an EV vehicle. We would request a number of amendments. We would request that this does not apply to existing buildings. We would request exemptions for buildings undergoing seismic retrofit. As Supervisor Peskin mentioned, that's running at a pretty high expense. We would request exemptions for buildings undergoing ADU. This seems to be a laudable goal, but it's put on the back of property owners, and it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. We would ask you to...
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Supervisors. My name is Bart Murphy. I'm a property owner and probably the only one speaking to you today who's actually going to have to pay for this thing, as opposed to designing the policy. I'm simply echoing the comments you heard from some of the other housing speakers here today, this legislation should, to the extent that it's mandatory, should be mandatory on new construction. If you go back and listen to the Building Commission hearings that took place on this, it was billed as addressing new construction. The lack of outreach is regrettable, and I hope that will be corrected this week. But in San Francisco, from a practical perspective, electrical upgrades, significant electrical upgrades, can be triggered from the most minor changes in a building. Simply putting in a GFI grounded plug in a kitchen can trigger the need to put in a new service, a new panel, and then PG&E start talking to you about new transformers, and before you know it, it's up to $150,000 cost. I noted the discussion today about exemptions. There's quite a distinction between the language in the legislative digest on what's exempted and the language in the code. The language in the code amendment is actually much more vague, and work has to be done on that to clearly delineate what is not what is exempted and what is not. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public here for public testimony? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. I definitely took notes, and we'll certainly try to circle back with you to address some of these concerns. I did want to just reiterate, I think, something that Mr. Hooper said earlier, again, which is that this legislation is not actually going to trigger, or it doesn't apply to, we don't trigger, basically, under this ordinance, your electrical upgrades. Again, I want to point to the definition of major alterations, which is alterations and additions where interior finishes are removed and significant upgrades to structural and mechanical, electrical, and or plumbing systems are proposed under your own project, not through our requirement here under this EV ordinance. So that's something that I hope is clear on pages 4 and 5 under the definitions. Other than that, I don't think that we ever tried to hide the ball about the fact that this applies to significant or major alterations. It's always been in the legislation, but again, we can talk through those things as well. So for today's purposes in this hearing, I would like to make a motion then to adopt the amendments that we have discussed and that SF Environment staff have outlined, and then we will continue this for 1 week to the next Land Use Committee meeting, and then we will have our follow-up conversations in the meantime.
Supervisor Sheehy? All right, without objection, we will adopt the amendments and continue this item for 1 week, and that concludes our agenda. We are adjourned.